Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily rule. Today I'll be discussing situations that I fielded last weekend judging at MagicCon Amsterdam. If you think this is a pretty fast turnaround time for such a video, that's the sort of wonderful thing that can happen when your flight home gets canceled and you get a surprise additional night added to your vacation on short notice. Despite this, I had a wonderful time on my trip. Friday, my only schedule was a stint in the Creator Central, and I got to meet dozens of fans, many for the first time, but also some whom I met during my previous trips to Europe and other MagicCons. I'd also love to give a huge shout out to the crew that they had staff in Creator area for making me feel super welcome, by the way. On Saturday and Sunday, I was working as a judge, and of course I was on the lookout for interesting rulings that I could share with all of you in this tournament report video here. The first scenario that I wanted to share was a simple question that I got from a player. My opponent isn't here. How much longer do I need to wait? Now, this is not an interesting question in itself. The answer is relatively straightforward. If one of the players is not at the table when the round clock starts, that player will be presumed to have dropped from the event at 10 minutes into the round. This is true regardless of the rules enforcement level, and I discussed this in my video on how tardiness works. The thing that makes this question a little bit more interesting was the language barrier. Being from the United States, most of my judging experience is in an environment where I can assume everyone at the table speaks English as a first language. Judging in an environment that breaks that assumption introduces some additional complications. The player in this example tried asking me this question in English, but I was not able to understand him, so he pulled out his phone, got on Google Translate, and asked it that way. When I saw the language that he translated it from, I was a little bit chagrined. Portuguese. Atualmente eu aprendi pouco de português para GP no São Paulo. Eu poderia dizer, você vai ganhar a roda em 2 minutos, and even though the grammar and the pronunciation wouldn't be all the way there, I feel like the player probably would have been able to understand the intended meaning that he would win the round in another 2 minutes. Real Portuguese speakers, please let me know how I did in the comments. Now, I'm sure all of them will believe me when I say that I actually did come up with that sentence 100% on my own, no AI translation needed, but it was also after the fact, not in a real-time conversation in front of another human being, which definitely makes a difference. Having one or both parties communicate in a language that they aren't comfortable in takes up part of each of their mental stacks, which creates friction in the ruling. I first gained an appreciation for this at that GP in Sao Paulo that I mentioned, but it had been a while since I judged at a foreign event, so I had not had to deal with this in a while. One of the biggest challenges that I faced at this MagicCon was adjusting my normal approach to give that factor the respect that it deserved. The fact is, almost all of the players I interacted with were able to speak English at a level I would describe as pretty fluent. But even knowing this might not be the case at every single call that I took required just a little bit of extra energy that I could feel adding up over the course of the day, although I'm prepared to believe that my higher than average energy consumption rate could be due to any of several other confounding factors, such as jet lag or various other culture shocks from being in a European convention center. Europeans love to talk about how much better their public transit is, so I feel compelled to defend my honor a little bit and talk about American convention centers, which have approximately 2 to 3 times the number of amenities like bathrooms and trash cans compared to what I've seen across the pond. Also, we have this little invention called a drinking fountain, so you don't have to carry around a water bottle everywhere or go thirsty. At least RAI Amsterdam had their air conditioners turned on. From what I've been reading, I was a little bit afraid that I was in for a repeat of MagicCon Barcelona, which had everyone sweating
like a whore in church. It was horrible.
Thank you for that poetic description, Tappy. Now, to be fair, I'm sure that there's probably some other differences that would compare more favorably, but for me, this is one part of my experience where I had a lot more negative surprises than positive ones. Anyway, there was one other instance of a language barrier causing an actual rather than merely subjectively based issue. It came up regarding the following ruling. Amy wants to play Kozilek's Command using mana from the second ability of Eldrazi Temple. Nick controls Painter's Servant naming red. Is this possible? And the answer is no. You can only use that mana to cast colorless Eldrazi spells. Painter's Servant makes all spells red though, so no spells will be colorless as long as Painter's Servant is out. Now that's the ruling that I delivered to the players, and while Nick seemed happy to accept it, Amy was more skeptical. From what I could gather, Amy's objection centered around the fact that even with Painter's Servant out, the colorless mana symbols in Kozilek's Command mana cost required colorless mana to be paid, and therefore this should still be considered a colorless spell. And normally I would address such objections by pointing out that colorless is not a color of Magic. Colorless just means something is none of the 5 normal colors. A Grizzly Bear's spell, therefore, could be both red and green, but a spell that is both red and colorless is a tautological impossibility, sort of like a married bachelor or a positively charged electron. I'm not sure whether this is as linguistically clear in French as it is in English, but in any case, I was not able to successfully communicate it in a way that was satisfying to Amy. Unfortunately, the level of language skills needed to understand and answer a rules question is significantly lower than the level needed to explain why the answer is a certain way, which is what was needed here. I could have attempted to cross this bridge via the Google Translate solution discussed earlier, but the deficiencies of machine translation tend to manifest themselves more frequently in situations where nuance and reasoning are important, so I considered it less appropriate in this case than the solution that I actually pursued, finding a judge who actually does speak French and asking him to interpret for me. The first key takeaway from this story is to use your resources appropriately. Asking for help can be difficult, especially for those whose job, ipso facto, involve taking on responsibility, but sometimes you need to swallow your pride and admit someone else has more of whatever skills are needed for the challenging scenario that you're facing than you do. Many judges are already used to this concept as it relates to rules questions, but it applies equally to logistical and language skills as well. I was particularly struck by the expression of relief on Amy's face when she heard another judge talking to her in French. To me, if a player does not understand or agree with a judge's ruling, the most likely cause is a deficiency on the judge's part to communicate the ruling sufficiently. And as such, the appropriate response from the judge should be one of sincere concern rather than frustration or annoyance. And I hope that that spirit came through for Amy with my handling of her case. The next ruling that I had a question with, Amy plays a Soul Guide Lantern when Nick has no cards in his graveyard, but Amy does. Must Amy exile one of her own cards when it enters the battlefield? And yes, it was a German Soul Guide Lantern that the player was asking about. Now, if we were talking about a Lanterna Guia Almas, I could have probably read and understood the Portuguese text in sufficient detail that I would not have had to look the card up. In fact, because of my experience in Latin, I probably could have done that if it was any Romance language, even a Lanterne Guidane. And this is even though I know about as much about pronouncing in French as I just demonstrated, and I would have had no chance of understanding the same words if they were read aloud to me. That said, even if I could read the foreign version of the card fluently, I would still look it up, because the answer to this question depends sensitively on the exact wording on the card. I'm not going to take a chance on missing this one, because I was too lazy to take out my phone and spend 5 seconds looking it up. It's Soul-Guide Lantern, by the way. Anyway, it does not say up to one target or you may exile. There's nothing on the text of this card indicating that exiling with the ability is optional, which means it isn't. Amy is able to exile something, and she must do it, even if it's one of her own cards. Speaking of looking things up, for this next question, Amy cast a Green Sun Zenith, and Nick responded with Containment Priest. If Amy chooses Grist the Hunger Tide, can she put it onto the battlefield? Now, I got some feedback recently that people enjoyed seeing my thought process for working through a ruling rather than just having the correct answer presented up front. In that spirit, I'll show you exactly the steps that I went through to find the correct answer to this question. Of course, after I finished delivering the ruling to the players, I let the ad play through in its entirety as a show of gratitude to the hardworking content creators making videos like this as a reference to the Magic community. In all seriousness, I've had judges tell me before that they've used my videos as a source, and even in live calls. I am aware of this, and that's why I always have the answer in the description, so if you need an answer fast, you don't have to wait through my explanation. A couple of takeaways from this question. First, if you noticed, I completely ignored the AI answer. Although it's changed now, during the live call, the suggested answer was actually incorrect, which happens a fair amount with Magic rules questions. If you just need a quick answer to keep your kitchen table game going, I guess it's better than nothing, but here's an obligatory PSA that AI should not be trusted in any situation where it's important to have a reliably correct answer and there are consequences for getting it wrong. Now, speaking of getting it wrong, if you've been a longtime fan of the channel, you know that I place more emphasis on having a correct explanation than a correct answer. The general consensus among my colleagues is that it is bad practice to memorize rulings and that judges should rather focus on having the fundamental rules skills to be able to derive them rather than recall the correct answers to questions. In this case, however, that's somewhat impractical. You can check out the other video if you want the details, but the CR support for this particular scenario is rather arcane and relies on interpreting the meaning of the relevant text from the CR in the same way that the Magic's rules team were applying it when they came up with the answer. If I was a cynic, I might think someone from the rules team decided what the answer to be and worked backwards from there to try to find an explanation that would justify it. But then again, that might just be sour grapes from having to remake the video since I came to a different conclusion about what the answer should be. Twice. Finally, I'll close out with one more interesting scenario that a colleague shared with me. Amy plays the superhero Civil War and steals both of Nick's Doombot tokens that he created with Dr. Doom. For Chapter 3, Amy has one of the Doombots fight Dr. Doom. Which creatures does Nick control after this happens? Now, obviously, to make this an interesting question, we'll say there are not any other artifact creatures or plans in play that could make Dr. Doom indestructible. So, to answer this one, we'll work through exactly what officially happens in the game, step by step. First up, as you probably know, after a saga hits its final chapter ability, it goes to the graveyard. Usually, the specific mechanism for how this works is not significant, but for this question, it's important to know that sacrificing a completed saga is a state-based action, and that as long as the saga has a chapter ability on the stack, that state-based action does not apply to it. So when the Chapter 3 ability resolves, Amy controls both Doombots and Nick controls Dr. Doom, which is good because that fulfills all of the targeting requirements for the Chapter 3 ability. As this ability resolves, Dr. Doom will deal 3 damage to one of the Doombots and take 3 damage back. Now, the game performs state-based actions. One state-based action is that Amy's saga has finished and needs to be sacrificed. Another is that there are 2 creatures, the ones that just fought, that have lethal damage marked on them. Amy gets to control Nick's Doombots as long as her saga remains on the battlefield, so the Dr. Doom does not have indestructible. Accordingly, Dr. Doom and one of the Doombots will go to the graveyard, and Nick will get the other one back. Now, if you look at that Chapter 1 ability a little bit more closely, you might have been thinking about something very villainous. The 2 creatures that you steal have to have a total mana value of 6 or less. Now, did you know that 6 plus 0 is 6 or less? So it would in fact be legal for Amy to use the Chapter 1 ability to steal Dr. Doom and one of the Doombots. Let's re-examine how this scenario would have played out if Amy had done this instead. Like before, Nick will not get any of the creatures back until after the superhero Civil War leaves the battlefield. Now, as the Chapter 3 ability resolves, Amy can choose to have Dr. Doom fight any other creature, either the Doombot she stole or the one that Nick still controls. Suppose she has Dr. Doom fight the Doombot she controls. In that case, when the game performs state-based actions after the Chapter 3 ability resolves, Amy will control Dr. Doom and that Doombot. There will be one state-based action that wants to have her sacrifice the saga, as in the previous scenario, and another that will destroy her lethally damaged Doombot. Dr. Doom also has lethal damage on it, but at this time, Amy controls this creature, and also she controls an artifact creature. Although her Doombot is lethally damaged, it is still on the battlefield. So the condition to give Dr. Doom indestructible is satisfied. Because at least one state-based action was performed, the state-based action check is repeated. This time, the superhero Civil War is no longer on the battlefield, so Amy will no longer control Dr. Doom. During this second state-based action check, Dr. Doom will still be lethally damaged, but because Dr. Doom's controller, Nick now, also has an artifact creature, the condition to give Dr. Doom indestructible is still satisfied. I'll leave it to the interested viewers to confirm the details, but the same sort of thing will happen if Amy has Dr. Doom fight the other Doombot, where during the second state-based action check, Nick will control both Dr. Doom and one Doombot, and during the first, Amy will control Dr. Doom and one Doombot. Therefore, in a strikingly on-theme twist, you'd have to scheme, plan 2 turns ahead here to defeat Dr. Doom. Unless you use the Chapter 1 ability to steal both Doombots, Dr. Doom himself will escape. Be sure to keep this in mind if you ever have to face the same villainous choice that Amy did. Seriously? That's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.